Okay, welcome to our broadcast this week on the most significant research and news for creating your most beautiful, healthy life. And this week in the news was a story. It was presented back, I believe it was in May, may have even been March of this year at the National Academy of Sciences. And it was just published after that, just this month. And that is that a gene variant may actually contribute to obesity. And, last week I did a program, and that program was basically on that it may not be your fault that you're gaining weight. And I talked about the fact that a calorie is not a calorie. It's not a simple formula. Everybody keeps talking about, well, it's real simple. It's the law of thermodynamics. And that law of thermodynamics is, it's all about calories in versus calories out. Depending on how many calories you take in, if you don't exercise enough, if you don't expend enough calories, excess calories are going to become fat. People tell you it's very simple. It's a law. It's the law of thermodynamics. And we just blew that apart last week. And I would really recommend that you go back and watch that video. And one of the reasons is because I went through that there's a number of different factors. But one of those factors I talked about was, I said, there is some genetics within that. Particularly when we look at, there's so many pathways that are involved. There's billions of different genes. One of the things that we know is that, I said this last week, it's amazing because you have these really, really bright people that are genius type people. They're researchers. They spend their whole life researching. And they still believe that a calorie is a calorie. They still believe that it's all the law of thermodynamics, calories in versus calories out. Yet anyone else in the general public doesn't take a genius to know that there's people that can eat and eat and eat and not gain weight, and another person, it seems like they look at food and they gain weight. So we know that's not true. And that's really what I talked about. But researchers from Duke University and from the University of North Carolina have found that there's variations in a gene called the ankyrin B gene. And what they found is that this gene affects GLUT4, and that's the glucose transport 4. And what this is, and I'll go through this, and let me just show you. Let's see if we can bring this up here. Hold on here. Okay. And this is cell autonomous adiposity through increased cell surface GLUT4 due to ankyrin B deficiency. And here's the thing. This GLUT4 is a protein found throughout the entire body. It's present in pretty much every tissue. And the way that it works is I'll try to go through this and explain how this actually works, because when there's glucose outside the cell and we need to get it inside the cell, one of the things, it can't cross the cell membrane. So it needs insulin. And insulin is a protein, and proteins can't cross the cell membrane. So insulin will attach onto an insulin receptor. That receptor triggers, it actually signals for GLUT4, which is inside the cell, and what it does is then GLUT4 goes to the cell membrane. It goes through it sort of extends these almost like a tubule through the membrane. So it's coming, it goes through that membrane, and then it pulls the glucose in. Now there's about 14 different which are glucose transporters within the body, but there's really only 5 that are really important. And of those 5, there's only one that is insulin dependent. All the other ones are insulin independent. And that one that's insulin dependent is the GLUT4. And so what they found was that when they eliminated this gene, when they eliminated the ankyrin B gene, or when there was a there was a mutation, what they found was it essentially opened the floodgates. It allowed glucose to just flow into the cell, particularly, and by the way, GLUT4 is, even though it's found throughout the body, it's most heavily found in the skeletal tissue, the heart tissue, and it's really important in this one, is the adipose tissue. So it's the adipocytes. In other words, fat cells, and particularly the white fat cells. So those are our bad fat. That's the fat that we want to decrease. Well, what they found was, and really, when you have a problem with this gene, it can cause a lot of other issues. In fact, we know that it can cause issues with the heart. It's been linked to autism. It's been linked to muscular dystrophy. It's been linked to diabetes, irregular heartbeat, and other cardiac problems, aging. And one of the researchers, it was, and it's interesting because this lab, and it was at Duke University. It was really a cooperative between Duke and University of North Carolina that they've did that. And this ankyrin B was found about 30 years ago by Dr. Bennett, and he linked it to all these different diseases. But at the same time they were studying this, there were, in his lab, they had different doctoral students and fellows. And one of those, this was years back, was Jean Healy. She was a MD, PhD. And one of the things that she found was that the mice that had these cardiac conditions were much larger than control mice. They were much larger than the wild mice. And so they've been looking at this. In fact, and let me bring up the, hold on here. Let me see if we can bring this up on the screen and get to actually show you some of this. This is in the internet. This is the article, but if we go, this was some people who have talked about it, and they went through, this is scientists have identified the gene that makes some people gain weight. And they went through and they showed that these are two mice that ate the exact same amount of food and did the same amount of exercise. And what they found was that the one mouse was almost twice as large. In fact, they had double the amount of this white adipose tissue. And so now what they did was, and Dr. Damaris Lorenzo, he's the author of this, and they said that they found that when they would go in and they made a knockout mice that took out the ankyrin B gene, it was quickly accumulated more triglycerides, quickly accumulated more fat into these tissues. And in fact, he said, we know that it contributed to inflammation, it disrupted the insulin response, and basically they said it's an indicator for diabetes. But here's the thing, we know that when they changed this gene, and that when there was an interruption to the gene, that there was an issue. But the problem is that there's only 1.3% of Caucasians, 8.4% of African Americans even have this gene. So yeah, it definitely may contribute, but when we say it contributes, the one thing that we do know is that it's not the actual cause. You take a look at obesity, is almost 40%, and we have 1.3% of Caucasians have this gene. See, it's just one other aspect of this. And by the way, here's a gene that anytime that you disrupt the way the body works, there's going to be a problem. There's going to be a metabolic problem. So when you start to look at things from this, and we got to go down to the molecular level, then the cellular level, and then the metabolic level, how it affects different hormones. So when we knock this gene out, and that gene's not functioning properly, we know that it controls, and they don't even know how this is, but we do know there has to be some relationship between ankyrin B and GLUT4. And that GLUT4 has a relationship we know of with insulin. In fact, GLUT4 is insulin dependent. So as the pancreas produces more insulin because of this response to the glucose, the insulin goes to the receptors. The receptors stimulate GLUT4. By the way, there's another way to stimulate GLUT4, and that is through exercise. And there are actually two different subtypes of GLUT4. There's one that is insulin, is mainly responds to insulin. The other one responds to exercise. And so one of the things is that this is involved, but we know that mutations can cause this and basically open up the floodgates for glucose to enter the cell, allowing the cell to gain a considerable amount of fat. And you see the difference. So here you saw those mice, and the one mouse was completely, they ate the exact same amount of food. And that's what I was talking about. Last week, when I went through all the different things, when we say a calorie isn't a calorie, because the two mice that had the exact same calories, and we see one mouse is twice as large as the other mouse. And we saw the same thing occur with circadian rhythm. We know that that hydration of the cell affects metabolism. And so again, what we find out is the same thing that I've been saying, and that is you need the body to be balanced. That means, and if you have a genetic variant, you can overcome that. And we can do that. You know, that's one of the things that I think that Nutrimost has been on the forefront of, because we're looking at how does food affect the hormones? How does it affect your metabolism? How does it affect the brain? How does it affect signaling within the body? What are the things that we need to do? How do we overcome this? How do we, what effect does methylation have, or deacetylation of the cell? And particularly when we're dealing with the genes, with these epigenetic factors. What's the effect of the microbiome within our body? So again, this is you hear the researchers, they come on and they talk about these things and talk about the fact that we found this obesity gene. And I just wanted to spend a little bit of time on this, that the reality of it is that this isn't, when you see these things and you see they're talking about there's a gene, and it made news. It's like, this is a big gene, and particularly when you see, one mouse that's twice as large as the other mouse, and you say, oh my gosh, maybe I have that gene. I hardly eat, and I gain much more weight than someone else that eats much more than me. And you think, maybe I have that. Let me just tell you, no matter what, you can overcome these challenges, including epigenetic challenges. And I just want to put things into perspective, particularly when 1.3% of Caucasians, 8.4% of African Americans have this gene. And by the way, even that fact, that would mean that you would have to be about almost, there'd be 7 times the obesity in African Americans than Caucasian. And the amount of obesity would be like 1.3% or 8.4%. It's not what it is. It's just another factor. It's just the body not functioning properly. And what Nutrimost is all about is saying, let's take a look at the clues. How does and we look at from 2 different perspectives. We're always looking at it from the perspective of both the energy of the body, the energy of the cell, and we're looking at it, how does food affect that? So there's 2 aspects, and it's interesting because you have one group, there's groups out there that are saying it's all about energy, and food doesn't matter, and that's totally wrong. And then you have people that are just, it's all about food, and they don't look at anything else. And it's really that God put this amazing power in our body. That power, it knows how to run the body. And what we need to do is, it's when it becomes imbalanced. And what we need to do is look at the clues and say, what do we need to balance the body? And the reality of it is all of us, the way that we eat, we tend to eat the same foods. We tend to do the same things. We tend to have the same habits. We are exposed to certain environmental factors. There are genetic involvements and when certain genes have various variants, what that means is, in those genes, and by the way, those variants sometimes were created by mutations for specific reasons to help protect us. And we may not need that type of protection today. We'll do a program on that. But the reality of it is that there is always something to do when you understand that. For instance, some gene variants, you may need more of the B vitamins. So we would want foods that have more B vitamins. We would want to supplement with B vitamins. The thing is, you need to try to find out what it is with your body to create a personalized program for you that will help you overcome these challenges. So I'm really glad that, that we addressed this today, because of the fact that we do see this was in the news. It made a little bit of a splash in some places. Some people didn't see it as much, but I saw it and I thought, I'm going to go over this today. This is just a quick overview of that. But thank you for being here. Make sure you join us every Thursday at 12 noon on Facebook at Nutrimos USA, and we also broadcast every Saturday at 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. That's a simultaneous broadcast with the first radio station in the world, KDKA Pittsburgh. And so we look forward to seeing you then.